Tonight, a hush settles over the ancient stones, where the first fires were coaxed to life by hands rough with frost and hunger. Somewhere, deep in the dark throat of a forgotten cave, embers still glow, their warmth breathing against the cold limestone walls. A mammoth bone hearth crackles low, shadows bending along the rock like drifting memories, soft and strange. Here the Neanderthals gather close, skins draped over shoulders, hair damped from melted snow. Some say they were freaks of nature, but in the hush of this night they are only human, breathing slow under fur hides that smell of smoke and old pine. Outside the cave mouth, the world lies frozen, a wilderness of ice and creaking branches, where the wind carries the howl of predators just beyond the glow of the hearth. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of tallow lamps, damp earth, and the faint musk of wet fur drying by the stones. A child shifts closer to a mother's side, tiny fingers tracing the ribs of a half-scorched mammoth bone. Feeling the warmth seep into the cold creases of their skin, the elder hums something low, a tune with no words, older than any tongue, carried from one fire to the next like an ember wrapped in moss. Where are they watching from, these soft souls pressed shoulder to shoulder in the cave's heart? What time is it out there, where the river freezes thick and the saber-tooth waits in the shadows? The fur drapes heavy, the breath slows, and the world drifts far away, replaced by the hum of ancient voices speaking in crackles and pops. Their eyes close, but the flames dance still. Flickering beasts painted hunts. Memories pressed into the stone. In the center of the cave, the mammoth bone hearth glows with a warmth so old it feels like a heartbeat pressed into stone. Curved tusks chart at the ends, cradle the coals like giant ribs, holding back the cold that creeps along the limestone floor. The fire flickers against the skulls stacked near the walls, trophies, offerings, memories, each hollow eye socket catching the light like a watchful spirit. The tribe huddles close, their backs rounded under thick fur cloaks, hair matted with grease and smoke. A woman leans in to stir the embers with a branch stripped smooth, pushing marrow bones deeper into the flame until they hiss and crack. The air tastes of charred fat, drifting up to the jagged ceiling where soot clings like night. A boy dozes near the edge, head tipped against a folded hide, dreams stitched with the snap of burning bone and the hiss of melting tallow. Now and then, someone shifts. A grunt, a cough, the rustle of feet against stone. The sound settles back into silence just as quickly, swallowed by the steady, slow crackle of the hearth. A mother rubs her thumb across her child's forehead, sweeping away a smudge of ash. Outside, the ice wind rattles the cave mouth, but the heat here stays thick. Pressed between ancient stones and skins worn soft by countless nights just like this one. A hunter's spear leans against the hearth, its tip dark with dried blood. Another man turns it over in his calloused hands, the flint point catching the firelight. They do not speak of tomorrow's hunt. Their eyes stay half-closed, fixed on the coals, drifting inward. Beneath the bones, tiny sparks. Somewhere in the deeper shadows, a half-tame wolf lifts its nose, sniffs the smoky air, and settles its head onto crossed paws. Its fur steams where the fire's warmth has melted the clinging frost. The smell of wet fur mixes with the rich scent of marrow bubbling inside cracked bone. The heat hums against the skin, a soft drum that echoes through muscle and dreams. This is what holds them through the longest nights. The mammoth bone hearth, the coal and crackle, the smell of fat and pine resin, a promise that when the sun hides behind the frozen hills, there will still be warmth waiting. Teeth will sink into meat and bones will feed the flames. The flicker dances along the cave wall, painting shapes of antlers and tusks. Strange beasts that drift like smoke across the stone. One child shifts, toes curling against the fur piled at his feet. He watches the fire until his eyes grow heavy, lids drooping like the last flicker of flame before sleep. The hearth sighs low, its breath mingling with the hush of old stones and the soft pulse of winter beyond the mouth of the cave. Tonight, nothing hunts them here. The bones hold steady. Fire keeps its promise. And somewhere beneath the ashes, another coal waits, a heartbeat ready to carry them through the cold, one slow, smoky breath at a time. So let the light dim now. Let the fire hush its crackle, until it is only a whisper against the walls. Pull the hides closer. Feel the warm weight of another heartbeat against the ribs. breathe deeper, slower, like the snow drifting down from the ridge above. Tonight is not for tomorrow's hunger or the hunt. Tonight is only the cave, the fire, the breath that ties one soul to the next. Let the world fade into smoke and stone. Let sleep find its way through the ancient dark, coiling around the mammoth bones, curling into your dream. And somewhere, just before the final spark sighs away, one coal stays alive, pressed under moss and fur, waiting to light the next fire when the dawn comes creeping pale and new. Outside the mouth of the cave, a hush hangs in the trees, branches heavy with ice that snaps when the wind sighs too sharply. The hunter moves through the dark like a shadow made of fur and breath, boots crunching softly over packed snow. Draped across his shoulders, the carcass of a young deer sags limp, its blood drying in dark threads down his spine. Each step sinks into the crust of snow, leaving behind a trail that glitters under the thin glow of the moon. The forest watches him pass, the owl perched high among bare limbs, the fox slipping behind a drift, the saber-tooth that prowls but does not dare, the circle of firelight spilling from the cave mouth. The hunter's breath curls out slow, a ghost of warmth fading into the frozen hush. His spear, lashed with sinew, knocks against his knee as he walks, the flint tip dulled by the kill, but still sharp enough for another fight come dawn. At the cave entrance, a faint glow spills onto the snow, painting pale fire on the ice-crusted stones. He pauses before stepping inside, listening to the heartbeat of the tribe, the murmur of sleeping children, the crackle of the mammoth bone hearth, the low growl of the half-tame wolf as it scents the fresh blood on the wind. He lifts a hand to his shoulder, adjusting the burden of meat so it does not slip into the dirt. When he finally steps inside, the warmth hits him like a slow wave, the temps of tallow smoke and wet fur wrapping around his cold skin. He lowers the deer onto the stone floor near the hearth, careful not to wake those who drift in the shallows of sleep. A woman stirs, opens her eyes just long enough to see the prize, then lets her lids fall again, trusting that tomorrow will be full bellies and hot marrow in the bones. He crouches near the hearth, holds his raw hands out to the flicker of flame. His fingers twitch as feeling returns, pink skin blooming under soot and old blood. For a moment, he watches the sparks drift upward, catching on the black ribs of the cave ceiling before they wink out. The smell of charred fat and pine resin weaves around him, burying the scent of iron and snow that clings to his hair. In the corner, the half-tame wolf lifts its head, sniffs at the deer, and lets out a low rumble of satisfaction before settling back down, paws crossed neatly under its muzzle. The hunter touches its flank once, a rough palm pressed to warm fur, an old pact sealed in silence and bone. When his limbs feel heavy with heat, the hunter folds himself near the edge of the fire circle, back resting against a stack of furs. His spear leans beside him, tip dark in the glow. A quiet promise that the hunt never really ends, only waits coiled in the dark behind his eyelids. Beyond the stone walls, the forest breathes around the footprints he left behind. Snow begins to drift again, soft as sleep, burying the trail step by step until only the cave remains, wrapped in warmth and the slow pulse of the hunter's return. Near the glow of the mammoth bone hearth, a child sleeps with one hand pressed into a smear of soft clay. The tiny palm leaves a shallow impression, each finger marked in the pale lump like a memory that will dry and harden by morning. Around the child's shoulders, a scrap of reindeer hide slips low, fur rough against bare skin. His breath moves in small puffs, warm and slow, stirring the fine ash that drifts from the fire's edge. Beside him, an older woman shifts in her sleep, arm draped protectively across his small back. Her hair spills in tangled ropes across her brow, heavy with the smell of smoke and pine pitch. Now and then her fingers twitch as if remembering how they once showed him to press his thumb into the clay, to shape the soft earth the same way ancestors pressed red ochre onto cave walls deep in the dark. The hearth crackles behind them, sending out a faint hiss that lulls the child deeper into dreams. Outside, the wind brushes past the cave mouth, but the warmth here wraps around his body like another skin. He sighs and burrows closer to the old hide, clay sticking to his knuckles, a tiny secret hardened by the fire's slow breath. A spark snaps in the coals, throwing a quick light across his sleeping face. For a moment the cave wall behind him glows with the shadows of the tribe, Bent heads, folded limbs, the wolf curled into itself near the bones. Somewhere deeper in the cave, the elder hums an almost silent note, a song that drifts through the stone ribs like the last wisp of smoke from the fire. The child's lips move, though no words form, only the soft exhale of a dream taking shape. Perhaps it is a memory from the hunt. The crack of flint against bone, a hot spill of blood on snow, or perhaps it is only the shape of warmth. The promise of bellies full, and the clay pressed into his palm like the ghost of something yet to come. Near his feet, a tiny bone carving lies half buried in the fur, a small beast with antlers, smoothed by countless fingers tracing its back. Someone made it for him long before he could speak, a charm to keep him close to the warmth, away from the teeth in the dark. The bone catches the hearth's glow, its shadow dancing across the rough cave floor. A flicker of life in the hush of sleeping stone. In the morning, when the first gray light brushes the ridge, the clay print will still hold the shape of his hand. The mother's breath will stir the embers again. The child will wake to find his mark hardened there beside the hearth. A reminder that even the smallest fingers can leave something behind. Pressed into earth and flame, safe in the hush of the Neanderthal cave. Just beyond the warm circle of the hearth, a row of animal hides hangs heavy on a line of stretched sinew, each pelt dripping with the last melt of snow. The moon slides its thin light through the mouth of the cave, silvering the fur where droplets cling like tiny beads of ice. A faint sharp temp drifts on the cold air, the scent of fresh skin scraped clean of fat and gristle. The raw promise of warmth once stitched into coats and boots. A young woman crouches near the hides, her breath clouding the frozen air as she runs a bone scraper across the thick back of a reindeer pelt. The tool rasps softly, a steady hush that blends with the wind's sigh just outside. Her fingers ache from the cold, knuckles raw where the skin has cracked. But she works without hurry, guided by memory older than words. The hides sway gently with each gust that slips into the cave, brushing her cheek with damp fur. Above her, the moon catches on the jagged lip of the stone roof, a pale eye watching her carve away the last stubborn scraps. She hums under her breath, a tune meant only for the darkness, a soft promise to the spirits of the beasts that gave their backs to keep the tribe from the bite of winter. Behind her, a small pile of scraped sinew waits to be twisted into thread, each strand tugged smooth by the pull of her teeth. Her grandmother showed her how to wet the fibers with spit, how to twist them strong enough to hold a seam, even when the snow tries to sneak through. She remembers that lesson now as she works, the memory warming her more than the weak glow of the dying hearth. Further down the line, a heavier hide hangs low, thick with the shaggy fur of a young bison taken near the river's bend. Its size makes her breath catch each time she lifts a corner to scrape, arms trembling under the weight. But the bison's warmth will spread across 3 backs come the coldest nights, the smell of smoke and pine clinging to it long after the last embers sink into ash. The half-tame wolf noses near her heel, sniffing at the scraps that fall from her scraper. It does not growl tonight, its hunger sated by the scraps of marrow cracked open for the children. The woman pauses to rub its flank with the back of her wrist, leaving a smear of grease in its coarse fur. The beast sighs through its nose, steam curling upward before it slips back into the dark to curl among the sleeping tribe. Outside, a drift of snow slides from the ridge, landing with a muffled thump that makes her glance at the mouth of the cave. She knows the wind will only grow sharper as night deepens, but the hides will hold. Each strip of fur and sinew, each push of the bone scraper, is a promise sealed in the hush of moonlight. The warmth they carry will seep into skin and bone, a shield against the winter that waits, hungry and wide, beyond the stones. When she sets down her tool at last, she lifts her raw hands to the night sky, letting the moon wash her skin in its pale blessing. Somewhere behind her, the hearth cracks, sending up a shower of tiny sparks that float for a heartbeat before they vanish into the ribs of the cave. The hides sway once more, heavy and clean, soaked in moonlight, and ready to keep the tribe warm through another long, dreaming dark. In the deepest pocket of the cave, where the hearth's glow reaches only as a pale flicker, the elder sits with her back pressed to a wall worn smooth by years of breath and bone. Her hair spreads like a pale crown around her shoulders, strands clinging to the fur cloak that pools at her hips. She hums into the stone ribs, her voice soft as moss growing in the cracks. The tune twists through the dark, brushing against the sleepers curled near the fire, drifting into the dreams of children and hunters alike. Her hands move in the shadows, knotted fingers tracing lines across the rough floor. Sometimes they lift to the wall, skimming the ochre marks pressed there by ancestors who came long before her first cry echoed off these stones. She knows every shape, the clawed beasts with curling tails, the swirl of horns, the palm prints pressed flat like ghosts reaching from the past. Her breath catches when her fingers rest inside one of those prints, a hush falling as if the cave itself listens. A boy stirs near the edge of the hearth, eyes half open, caught between the pull of sleep and the call of her song. He watches the elder's lips shape the old sounds, words lost to time, but warm as fire in the dark. His lids flutter, closing again as her voice weaves into the crackle of the mammoth bones. She smiles when she sees him drift deeper, tiny hands still curled around a clay figure he shaped hours before. The elder's whispers carry the weight of every winter survived, every hunt remembered in blood and marrow. Her stories never follow the sun's path. They spiral like smoke, coiling around the tribe until even the half-tame wolf lifts its head, ears flicking at the quiet rise and fall of her tune. She hums to the beasts painted on the walls, to the bones stacked near the hearth, to the footprints pressed into the cave floor that will vanish under new snow by morning. Once she pauses, fingers resting on a crack that splits a painted antler. She leans close, pressing her cheek to the cold stone, breathing in the scent of old ash and damp rock. In that hush, the shapes seem to move under her skin, beasts that walk from the wall, snorting frost into her hair, their hooves pounding the hard earth of memory. She hums louder for a heartbeat, voice trembling, then softens again, letting the shapes settle back into paint and dust. A distant wind creeps through the entrance, rattling the hides stretched on their sinew lines. The elder pulls her cloak tighter, the fur rough against her throat. She whispers a promise to the spirits of the ridge, the ones that watch the cave from the highest rocks. An old pact to keep the tribe wrapped in warmth. Bones full of marrow, children safe from teeth that prowled the edges of the light. When her voice grows thin with sleep, she lets it fade into the crackle of the hearth. Her eyes slip closed, lashes brushing her cheeks like moth wings. Her breathing falls into the slow rhythm of the cave's heartbeat, coals settling under mammoth bones, soft feet shifting against fur hides, the sigh of the snow falling far outside the stone walls. In the dark, the elder's whispers stay behind, caught in the cold limestone, ready to wake again when the next fire crackles to life, and someone needs an old story to hold them through the longest night. Deep in the cave's throat, past the warmth of the mammoth bone hearth, the walls breathe with shapes older than any word spoken aloud. Flickering torchlight licks across rough limestone, waking colors pressed there by hands rough with callus and damp with ochre. A smear of red curls into the outline of a bison, its shoulders hunched as if it still snorts steam into the cold dark. Beside it, the broad sweep of a mammoth's tusk arcs over a scatter of palm prints, each mark pressed flat as a heartbeat into stone. A girl crouches close to the wall, knees tucked under her chin, the fur draped around her shoulders slipping onto the cold earth. In her palm, a chunk of ochre crumbles under her thumb, rubs it against the wall with careful circles, pressing the color into the old shapes, so they do not fade beneath soot and time. Her breath fogs the rock where she leans too close, a small ghost among the painted beasts. The hush here is thick. The crackle of the hearth reaches only as a faraway pulse, the soft hum of the elder's voice a memory still echoing between the stone ribs. The girl's fingers hover above a spiral scratched shallow into the rock. She wonders who pressed it first, what shape they hoped to hold in place when the fires died. She dips her thumb into a hollow of ochre again, filling the line so the spiral gleams dark and wet in the torch's weak glow. Behind her, the stone floor dips into a narrow passage where only the smallest can crawl. A faint draft coils through that passage, stirring the girl's hair against her cheeks. She closes her eyes for a moment, listening to the wind hum through the cracks. A sound so thin, it might be the whisper of those who left their handprints here long before. She presses her own palm against the wall, fingers splayed wide, her skin warm and shaking. When she pulls it back, the print stays behind. Fresh, small, red against the cold gray stone. Far above, soot drifts down from the blackened ceiling, where countless fires have painted their own stories in smoke. The torch sputters, throwing shadows that make the painted beasts dance. The bison's shoulders roll. The mammoth's tusks swing in slow arcs. The girl watches them move, the ochre stain under her nails proof that they belong to her now, as much as to those who hunted in the snow outside this stone throat. Somewhere deeper in the shadows, a tiny bone flute sighs under a child's sleeping breath. Its note slips down the passage, brushing the girl's shoulders, weaving into her heartbeat as she adds another swirl of red. She does not know what the marks will mean when she is old, when her hair turns the color of ash and her breath hums like the elders, but she knows they will stay. A promise pressed into stone, marked that the tribe was here, warm-blooded and dreaming, while the ice growled beyond the cave mouth. When her hands grow numb from the cold rock, she sits back on her heels, rubbing her palms together. A torch crackles once, sending a wave of gold across the wall. Beasts and spirals flicker, shadows trembling before they settle again into their ancient silence. The girl gathers her fur tight around her shoulders, her fingers still stained red, her eyes wide and slow, seeing stories that breathe long after she has drifted back to the warmth of the mammoth bone hearth. At the cave mouth, where the stone meets the drifting dark, a hush of damp air slips inside, carrying the smell of wet fur and pine sap cracked open by the first touch of rain. The night's snowfall has turned to a thin drizzle, soft enough to patter against the hides stretched across the entrance, each drop tapping a slow rhythm like a distant drum. From time to time, the wind shifts, pushing the scent of the forest deeper into the warmth where Bodhi's sleep shoulder to shoulder. A hunter stirs near the hearth, blinking heavy eyes at the cave's mouth. His cloak, stiff with frozen blood and marrow, steams faintly as the damp air meets the hearth's low heat. He shifts the folds of fur, letting the moisture bead on the outer hide, while the warmth beneath stays safe against his ribs. A fresh pelt, still raw at the edges, lies draped across a stack of stones, its hair plastered flat, water dripping into a shallow groove, worn smooth by seasons of melt and thaw. Close by, the half-tame wolf lifts its muzzle from its paws. Droplets cling to its rough coat, each hair thick with the scent of wet earth and musk. It huffs once, shaking its shoulders so the spray catches the low glow of the fire, tiny beads of water turning to steam before they reach the floor. The wolf noses the edge of the sleeping hides, sniffing for scraps of marrow or fat left behind by careless hands, but finds only the hush of breath and the soft thud of the elder's stick tapping the stones in her sleep. Near the wall, a pair of boots, stitched tight with sinew, rest upside down to dry. The dampness seeps into the leather slowly, the smell of wet hide rising with the faint warmth of the coals. A boy dreams beside them, cheek pressed to a patch of fur damp from where his head found the puddle left behind by the thaw. His mother shifts him closer to her side, brushing his hair back with fingers that smell of smoke and damp earth. A sudden gust rattles the hides at the entrance, pushing the smell of the forest through the cave. It clings to hair and skin. Pine needles crushed underfoot, the sharp bite of rain, the raw animal musk that hangs on every cloak, every spear shaft, every piece of bone used to scrape flesh clean. The wind dies just as quickly, leaving behind a deeper hush, as if the stones themselves hold their breath until the hearth's crackle settles the silence again. A woman rises from her place near the fire, barefoot, toes curling against the wet stone as she lifts the heavy hide that shields the cave from the worst of the wind. She peeks at the ridge, where the rain falls silver against the dark slope, before tugging the fur back into place. The smell of wet fur in the forest comes with her as she crouches near the fire, her hands splayed over the coals to catch their fading heat. Behind her, the wolf settles once more, its breath slowing as it curls its tail over its nose. The hunter drags the damp pelt closer to the flames, hoping the warmth will chase out the raw chill, before dawn comes creeping over the ridge. The smell of wet fur lingers in every fold of the cave, an ancient musk of survival, promise that even in the rain and cold, the fire and stone will hold them until the storm passes and the world hushes quiet once more. Near the hearth's gentle glow, a woman sits cross-legged on a patch of fur, her back rounded as she leans over a length of hide draped across her knees. A bone needle, slender and pale, flashes in her cracked fingers, its eye threaded with reindeer sinew, pulled smooth and damp from her lips. Each stitch slides through the skin with a quiet tug, the hide puckering just enough to hold warmth against the wind that presses at the cave mouth. A child sleeps with his head in her lap, cheek pressed into the soft weight of her thigh. Now and then he twitches in a dream, but the rise and fall of her breath keeps him anchored, safe in the hush between the cave stone ribs. She hums low, a tune she barely remembers learning, perhaps taught by the elder who sleeps now near the painted wall, or maybe older still, carried from the time when the people first coaxed needles from broken bones. The smell of damp fur curls around her, mingling with the tang of tallow smoke that seeps from the hearth. Every so often she wipes her thumb across the thread, pressing the sinew flat so it won't fray when pulled tight. The tip of the needle leaves tiny holes behind, each one a promise against the winter that gnaws at the stone just beyond the fire's reach. A boy nearby watches her with eyes half-lidded from sleep. He traces the path of the needle's bite with his finger on an old scrap of hide, mimicking her slow rhythm in the air. He wonders if his hands will ever move as smooth as hers, if he will learn how to mend a tear before the wind finds its way through and bites the warm skin beneath. She catches his gaze and smiles without pausing, her mouth full of sinew she tugs between her teeth. Behind her, a pile of bones waits in a basket woven from willow bark. Each one stripped of marrow, scraped clean, left to dry in the smoke until brittle enough to crack. Some will become needles like the one she works with now, points sharpened against stone, eyes bored open with careful twists of flint. She remembers the first one she broke, snapped between her trembling fingers when the ice was too thick and her hunger too sharp to keep her patient. That lesson lives under her fingernails even now, every stitch a hush of memory pressed into fur and skin. A flake of ash drifts down from the ceiling, landing in the child's hair. She brushes it away with the back of her wrist, leaving behind a faint streak of soot. That will wash out only when the thaw comes and they bathe in the river's shallows again. For now, the hearth's warmth is enough to keep the damp from soaking deeper into the hides that hang near the cave mouth, dripping rainwater like soft tears onto the stone. When the last seam closes, she bites the thread clean and rubs her thumb over the tiny knots. She holds the new cloak up to the flicker of the hearth. The stitches neat, the fur thick enough to turn aside the coldest wind that prowls the ridge. The child shifts in her lap, eyes fluttering open just long enough to see the shape of warmth she's made before he drifts back down, his breath curling against her ribs. She sets the bone needle aside with care, tucking it into a pouch lined with scraps of hide. Its sharp point gleams once before the shadows swallow it, ready to wake again when the next tear splits open, when the next winter tries to slip its teeth through the seams. The woman closes her eyes, head tipped forward over the boy's hair. The warmth of the fire and the hum of the tribe's breathing stitching the dreams together, strong as sinew, soft as fur, waiting for the dawn. Beyond the hush of the hearth, where the cave's warmth fades into the deep hush of snow-laden trees, the saber-toothed watcher waits. Its paws press silent hollows into the crust of ice, just beyond the circle of firelight, breath steaming from its jaws in slow, pulsing clouds. Pale moonlight catches on its fangs where they curve like carved ivory, each tip sharp enough to slip between ribs without a sound. The beast lowers its head, sniffing the air that drifts from the cave mouth. Wet fur, charred marrow, the soft musk of children curled close to old hides. Its shoulders ripple under a pelt, matted with melt and grit, muscles rolling smooth as water beneath thick fur. Now and then, a shard of ice cracks under its shifting weight, but the saber-tooth does not flinch. Its eyes, yellow and flat, flick toward the flicker that dances at the cave's edge. The promise of warmth it dares not breach. Fire has always been a wall, a barrier of smoke and ember that keeps teeth like these from slipping too close to soft throats and sleeping bellies. Inside, the tribe does not know how close the watcher drifts. A hunter's spear leans forgotten near the hearth, its flint tip dulled from the last kill. The half-tame wolf stirs, ears pricking at the sound of snow crackling beneath the beast's careful steps. A low growl hums in its chest, but dies just as quickly, buried under the crackle of mammoth bones that feed the hearth's glow. The saber-tooth stands still, head cocked, testing the warmth that sighs from the stone mouth. A wind picks up along the ridge, rattling brittle branches high above. Pine needles fall in a soft scatter, brushing the saber-tooth's broad shoulders as it shifts its weight. Its tail flicks, carving a path in the snow that will vanish when the next drift slides down the slope. It sensed the blood still clinging to scraped hides stretched near the entrance, a raw tang of iron and fat. Tempting but guarded by old stone and older fire, for a moment the beast's gaze fixes on a single shape within, a child's small foot, dangling bare from beneath a fur cloak. The saber-tooth's ears flatten, breath quickening as it leans forward just enough to catch a better taste of the warmth that spills like soft honey into the cold night air. A single step, paw pressing into the snow so deep the ice creaks, but the fire's light flickers brighter, casting a sharp edge across its amber eyes. Some memory older than the mammoth bone hearth hums in the saber-tooth's bones, a reminder that flame bites deeper than fang, that smoke blinds sharp eyes and sears a hunter's hunger into ash. Oh shit. Its jaw flexes once, lips peeling back to show those monstrous teeth, then closes again as the wind shifts, carrying the scent of pine and old bones instead. A final growl rumbles low in its throat, echoing in the hush between the trees. The saber-tooth turns its head toward the deeper shadows, its shape melting into the darkness with only the faint hush of snow disturbed in its wake. Tracks lead away from the cave mouth, wide as a man's chest, heavy enough to leave a memory pressed into the frozen crust until dawn. Inside, the half-tame wolf settles back onto its paws, nose buried under its tail. The child's foot curls deeper under the cloak, safe from the teeth that prowl just beyond the stones. The hearth sighs, sending up a single spark that drifts into the cold night. A tiny star to mark where warmth ends, and the wild waits, patient and hungry at the edge of sleep. In the hush that settles once the saber-tooth's paw prints vanish into the snow, the cave holds its breath around old bones and warm hides. Yet even in this circle of flame and stone, sharpness waits. Not always outside, but in the flicker of eyes that open when sleep should keep them soft. A pair of hunters sit near the hearth's edge, shoulders hunched over a half-stripped rib bone they pretend to share. The marrow inside glistens in the firelight, a prize too small for two hungry mouths. One man's hand creeps closer, fingers caked with ash and grease. He grips the bone's blunt end, tugging it back toward his lap. The other bristles, shoulders bunching under the rough fur draped over his spine. Their eyes lock, the quiet crackle of the fire filling the space where words might once have lived. A child stirs on the far side of the hearth, sensing the storm behind his closed lids, but the mother's hand settles him back into dreams before he wakes to the shape of anger. The first hunter bares his teeth, lips peeling back from yellowed molars worn flat by years of tearing fat from sinew. His breath reeks of old meat and the sour temps of fermented roots chewed in the dark. The other hisses low, the sound caught between throat and teeth, a warning that means nothing here in the warm hush. His knuckles tighten around the bone, grease slick between his fingers. A tiny crack pops from the marrow's hollow, a fragile break that turns silence sharp. In the shadows, the half-tame wolf lifts its head, eyes glinting with the hearth's faint light. It knows this growl, this clash of bone and want. A memory older than fire, older than the warmth that holds them shoulder to shoulder. Its tail sweeps once across the stone floor, but it does not rise. This fight belongs to its human pack, whose teeth can be just as cruel when the hunger pinches hard. A grunt splits the hush, one hunter lunging, fingers striking for the meat clutched in the other's hand. They tumble into the fur piled near the hearth, the bone rolling free, spinning in a lazy arc before clattering to a stop near the child's outstretched foot. He does not wake.
Oh.
The mother's hand cups his cheek, her eyes pinned to the figures tangled in the dark, their breath coming hard and hot as they grapple for scraps. No one else moves to stop them. The elder's dreams slip deeper into the cave wall, her soft hum swallowed by the hiss of the hearth. The hides at the entrance flap once, letting a gust of cold sneak in to bite at bare ankles and knuckles scuffed against stone. The fight is quick, teeth bared, fingers dug deep into hair and collarbone, then over. As the older man lands a blow that leaves the younger gasping, mouth open, eyes dull in the fire's flicker. The bone sits between them, its marrow smeared on rock. One man wipes blood from his lip with the back of his hand, scoops up what's left, turns his face back to the hearth, the heat licking his bruises dry. The other folds into himself, arms wrapped tight around his ribs, breath shuddering, but teeth hidden once more behind cracked lips. They do not look at each other, though the wolf's eyes linger on them, remembering the shape of their growls for the next cold night. Outside, the snow covers the saber-tooth's trail. Inside, the fire eats the marrow's last drops, leaving only bone for tomorrow's tools and the taste of sharpness that never fully sleeps. In the hush that settles back around the hearth, the shadows press closer, teeth bared only in memory, waiting for the dark to stir them awake again. Beyond the hearth's flicker, where the cave mouth opens to the heavy hush of winter, a shallow grave lies pressed into the frozen earth. The tribe gathered before dawn, shoulders draped in damp furs, boots crunching through the crusted snow as they moved toward the small hollow dug with flat stones and bare hands. Now, as the sky softens from black to the first pale gray, the burial mound waits, a gentle rise marked by a scattering of fresh pine needles and the whisper of breath caught in cold lungs. A young girl kneels at the grave's edge, her fingers curled tight around a bundle of dried flowers, brittle stalks wrapped in a strip of sinew. She places them at the mound's center, tucking the stems under a slab of frostbitten stone, so they do not blow away when the wind crawls down from the ridge. Her hair slips from its knot, brushing her cheeks, catching on the cold tears that slip from her lashes. She hums under her breath, a tune her mother once sang while scraping hides clean near the hearth, a tune now pressed into the snow, soft and slow. Nearby, a man stands with his spear planted upright in the drift, the flint tip dark against the pale sky. His breath moves in slow clouds, eyes fixed on the mound, but seeing far beyond it, tracks fading into the forest. The press of a body dragged through the drifts. When the sun hung low and the saber-tooth's roar still rattled the tree trunks, he grips the shaft tighter, knuckles whitening around the sinew binding. The spear will hunt again tomorrow, but tonight it stands guard over the one they could not bring back whole. A woman crouches at the other side of the grave, knees damp where the snow melts through the hide wrapped around her legs. She holds a painted stone, the spiral mark stained with red ochre. Warm once in her palm, but now cold as the skin she brushed for the last time before the earth swallowed its warmth. She places the stone at the girl's feet, pressing it down so it does not roll away in the thaw. Her mouth shapes words that break apart in the wind, fragments caught and carried toward the ridge where the spirits listen, tucked beneath the roots of old trees. The half-tame wolf watches from the tree line, yellow eyes glinting through a thin veil of falling snow. Its flanks rise and fall, steam curling from its muzzle as it scents the raw grief hanging heavy in the cold. It does not come closer, but it does not leave either, some pact written in bone and hunger binding it. To this place until the last figure turns away from the mound. When the last offering is given, the flowers, the painted stone, cracked piece of antler, polished smooth by a child's restless hand, the tribe steps back, boots pressing patterns into the snow that will fade with the next drift. They stand for a while in silence, breath mingling in the air above the grave, their shadows long and soft where the dawn slips through the bare trees. No words mark the end, only the hush of wind and the soft creak of branches shifting under the snow's weight. One by one they turn toward the cave, footsteps slow, the warmth of the hearth waiting to pull the chill from their bones. The girl glances back once, eyes tracing the line of the mound barely visible now beneath the falling snow. She presses her palm into the drift beside it, leaving a small print that will vanish before the sun claws its way up the sky. But for now it stays, a promise shaped in flesh and frost, a sign that they will remember. Even when the bones lie hidden and the wind hums its old hollow tune, inside, the hearth still crackles, a low heart that waits for the living to gather close again. The snow buries the mound inch by inch, soft as breath, gentle as sleep. When the sun climbs just high enough to crack the grip of frost, the tribe drifts from the hush of the cave toward the river's edge. The snow softens underfoot, crunch giving way to a wet hush as boots press down to the dark mud hidden below. Ice crusts the riverbanks in thick sheets, edges breaking into floating shards that drift past like pale leaves in the slow current. The air tastes sharp, but the promise of thaw slips between the pines, loosening the breath that clings to cold ribs. A boy kneels close to the water where a stone shelf juts into the stream, his knees soaked through the hide wrapped around them. He turns a flint core in his palm, napping at its edge with the tip of a bone, each strike sending tiny chips to scatter into the snowmelt. He works slowly, eyes half closed against the sun's pale glare on the water. When the flake curls away, thin and sharp, he holds it up to the light, the future shape of an arrowhead glinting soft as a promise. Beside him, a man crouches with his own hands raw from the cold, sinew lashes dangling from his belt like pale snakes waiting to be bound to wood. He watches the boys work without words, nodding once when the angle of the strike line's true. Now and then, he dips his fingers into the river, letting the shock of melt water bite through skin caked with tallow and ash. The chill hums through him, pulling his mind clear of the dreams that clung too close during the night. On the opposite bank, a woman scrapes clean a strip of hide soaked in the stream's flow. Her blade flashes as she pulls fat away from skin, rinsing the blade in the water before each fresh stroke. Tiny fish dart through the shallows, silver flickers that vanish when her shadow leans too close. She hums under her breath, letting the sound drift downstream where it tangles with the ice flows, carrying the memory of old hunts and warm hearths to places she will never see. A child wanders near the water's edge, sticks in both hands, tracing shapes in the dark sand revealed by the retreating snow. He presses the tip into the mud, drawing spirals and antlers like those carved deep into the cave walls. A flat stone catches his eye, smooth and round, its center cracked with a vein of iron. He lifts it, cold weight heavy in his small palm, and tucks it into a pouch hanging at his side. Even now, the world is a scatter of things to keep, to shape, to hold until the next winter tries to swallow them whole. Further upstream, a pair of hunters stand knee-deep in the shallows, where the ice has cracked apart. Spears rest across their shoulders, points turned toward the drift of fish that sometimes gather near the reeds. Their breath puffs soft above the ripples, eyes tracking each shadow that slips through the water's skin. They speak little, only the nod of a chin, the faint hiss of a name when a silver flash darts too quick to catch. They know this river's voice, the way it hums beneath the ice when the thaw first stirs. When the sun begins to slip behind the ridge again, the tribe gathers what they can. Flint flakes bundled in leather pouches, strips of hide rolled tight, stones pocketed for sharpening blades when the next hunt bleeds across the snow. The boy dips his raw fingers into the river one last time, washing away the dust of flint and the warmth of the man's nod. They walk back through the trees, breath mingling with the smell of pine and wet fur. Behind them, the river sighs around its broken ice. It's carrying tiny scraps of bone and old stories downstream to places where no footprints press into the banks. The sun sinks low, and the hush folds in again, the stone hearth waiting, the coals flickering soft asleep. Near the cave's low entrance, where the last drift of snow lies pressed against the stones, the half-tame wolf curls its body into the warmth that leaks from the hearth's flickering breath. Its fur, thick and coarse, holds the scent of pine needles and old blood. The musk of wild places wrapped now in the hush of a human circle. Its ribs rise and fall in a slow, steady rhythm, each breath carrying the memory of the hunt just beyond the tree line. When the wolf first came, it was only bones and eyes, ribs showing sharp beneath its ragged pelt, its eyes wide and watchful, never trusting the scent of smoke or the shape of upright shadows. The elder laid scraps of marrow near the mouth of the cave, each piece of bone licked clean before the animal vanished again into the dark. Night after night, its paw prints pressed deep into the snow. A trail that circled closer each time until the warmth of the hearth called it in like a promise stitched through the cold. Now, its muzzle rests on crossed paws, ears flicking at the soft shift of feet and the crackle of logs splintering in the fire. A boy reaches out from his fur cloak, fingers hovering just above the thick ruff behind the wolf's ears. He does not touch, not yet. Trust must be asked for, earned through quiet moments when teeth stay hidden and breath moves slow. The wolf's yellow eyes slip open, one after the other, watching the boy's hand as if it remembers every sharp edge of the cold world outside these stones. Near the back of the hearth, a woman drops a scrap of fat into the coals. The smell curls through the cave, rich and heavy, stirring the wolf's flanks where muscle tenses beneath fur. Its nostrils flare, tongue flicking out to taste the warm air. But it does not rise. The tribe has given it a place here, a quiet promise made of bones shared and bellies filled side by side with sharp-eyed hunters. Hunger may prowl close, but tonight it waits outside the fire's glow. When the wind rattles, the hides stretched at the cave's mouth. The wolf lifts its head, nose twitching at the taste of snow carried down from the ridge. It scents the paths where the deer moved at dusk. the place where a lynx pressed its pads into the drifts before vanishing beneath the low boughs. Its ears turned back to the boy, who whispers a hum meant only for the space between them. A tune older than words, a lullaby the boy's mother once sang while the wolf waited, thin and wary, beyond the glow of the hearth. Sometimes, when the tribe sleeps deepest, the wolf slips from the warmth and pads through the trees, paws leaving faint tracks in the soft crust. It circles the clearing, nose to the wind, eyes catching the shine of moonlight on frost. It listens for the groan of snow under hooves, the whisper of predators whose teeth gleam just beyond the reach of fire. When dawn drifts pale across the ridge, it returns. Fur dusted with ice, breath fogging the air, ribs pressing close to the warm circle once more. Now, near the hearth, the boy's hand finally brushes the coarse fur behind its ears. The wolf's tail flicks once, a thump against the stone floor. Its eyes close again, nose pressed to the child's wrist, breathing in the soft salt of skin warmed by sleep. In this hush, human and wild rest side by side, ribs rising and falling in the same slow rhythm, the cave walls holding them both in the glow of a promise older than any word carved into stone. Outside, the snowdrifts settle, the forest watches. But here in the circle of warmth and fur and fire, the half-tame wolf dreams its quiet dream. Not quite wild, not quite home, but bound to the tribe by the slow heartbeat of survival that hums through the long winter night. The hearth burns low as the longest night presses close around the stones, wrapping the tribe in a hush so deep it feels like a second skin. The hides draped across the cave's entrance tremble with the weight of the wind that prowls outside, snow hissing along the ridge and drifting high against the mouth of their shelter. Inside, bodies curl shoulder to shoulder, the warmth of breath and fur stitched tight against the cold that waits beyond the flicker of the coals. A mother lies with her child tucked under the curve of her arm. The boy's small hand pressed flat against her ribs, where her heartbeat moves slow as a bear in its den. She hums a low tune, though her eyes stay closed. Voice carrying the shape of old stories that belong more to the dark than to daylight. Her words slip into the cracks between stone and skin, a blanket woven from memory, and the promise that the fire's last coal will never truly die. Near the center of the hearth circle, an old man stirs, lifting his head just enough to see the silhouettes pressed around him, fur-upped. Hair tangled, faces softened in the glow that shivers above the bones. He remembers nights when the cold cracked stones and the wind crawled under hides, when the only warmth was found in the press of another body, ribs touching ribs like embers hidden in ash. His hand moves to the edge of the coals, fingers hovering above the heat that rises weak but steady. The half-tame wolf lifts its head from its paws, eyes catching the faint gleam of the embers. Its ears flick at the muffled growl of the wind clawing at the ridge, but it does not stand. It only shifts closer to the ring of sleeping bodies, ribs brushing against a hunter's hip, fur steaming where the heat licks its flanks. The wolf sighs through its nose, a quiet thread of breath that hums into the hush, folding wildness into the warmth that binds them all together. Outside the cave, snow stacks deeper against the stones. The ridge groans under the weight of ice clinging to bare branches. Somewhere far down the slope, an old tree creaks in the night wind, its roots locked tight in frozen soil. The world feels wider in this hush, yet the small circle of the hearth holds stronger than the dark that presses its teeth to the edge of the light. A girl wakes just enough to shift her feet deeper under a blanket of fur. Her eyes flutter, catching the faint shapes of painted beasts on the cave wall. Antlers and tusks drawn in ochre that gleam when the coals snap bright for a breath before sinking back into glow. She sees them move, shoulders rolling, hooves striking sparks that drift into her dreams. She presses closer to her sister's side, nose buried in the warm knot of hair that smells of tallow smoke and pine resin. No one speaks of the cold that waits outside. They do not name the hunger that prowls in the trees, the saber-tooth that paces where the fire does not reach. The longest night is met with silence, bones stacked high near the hearth to feed the coals when the drift seeps through the hides. The elder hums once from her dark corner, voice thin as a breath, then lets sleep pull her under where old stories grow soft as snow. By the time dawn thinks of waking, the cave will still hold its warmth. The longest night will loosen its grip, not with a roar but with the soft crack of ice melting along the ridge. The coals will hiss when fresh wood touches their heart, a new flame rising slow to brush the painted beasts awake again. Until then, the tribe breathes as one, fur against fur. Heartbeats threaded like sinew through hide. The hush of survival woven tight against the dark, holding them close through the coldest hush of all. In the farthest curve of the cave, where the stone walls bow close like the ribs of some ancient beast, a woman labors in the hush between the hearth's glow and the snow-packed dark. Her body curls around the ache of new life, knees pressed deep into a pile of fur that smells of smoke and pine resin. Her breath comes slow at first, then sharp, breaking the silence in short gasps that echo off the rock and slip down the passage toward the fire where the tribe dozes half awake. Beside her, another woman crouches, a strip of softened hide clenched between her teeth as she hums low into the laboring mother's hair. Her hands are slick with the warmth of birth, palms steady against the mother's hips each time her body tenses like a bow drawn tight. She does not speak. Her eyes fix on the hollow between the woman's thighs, waiting for the first glimpse of the child who is hidden all through the longest night, ready now to step into the circle of warmth and stone. The elder stirs near the hearth, eyes half open in the dark. She listens to the soft cries drifting through the hush, the pulse of pain that means new feet will press into the cave floor before dawn. She hums under her breath, a tune older than any hunt, older than the painted beasts that wait on the walls to catch the first coal's glow. The half-tame wolf lifts its head once, sniffing the air heavy with blood and damp fur, and settles again into sleep, its tail flicking against a hunter's hip. The mother's hands claw at the furs, fingers curling in knots of hide as the child's crown presses through, slick and dark in the flicker of a single tallow lamp. A gust of wind rattles the hides at the cave mouth, a whisper of cold that never quite reaches the warmth of this hidden chamber. The woman beside her breathes out, voice cracking around a single word that carries no meaning but promise. That this child will come, that the stone will hold, that the hearth's ember will wait for tiny feet to dance in its hush. With one last push, the mother's cry sharpens, then slips into a soft sigh as the child slides free, slick with blood and the warmth of the womb left behind. The helper catches the tiny body in her hands, lifting it to the mother's chest, where her arms tremble but do not let go. The child's first breath is a thin wail, sound that fills the deepest shadows of the cave with something brighter than any fire they have coaxed from stone and spark. Outside, snow slides from the ridge in a soft hush, the drift reshaping itself as if to make space for this new heartbeat pressed into the world. The wind sighs down the slope but carries no teeth tonight. Its growl dies at the hides that flap once before settling back into their watch over the cave's mouth. The painted beasts on the wall seem to stir, tusks and antlers catching the lamp's faint glow, as if they too breathe easier now. The mother kisses the crown of damp hair, her voice cracking on a hum that stitches her heartbeat to the tiny ribs pressed against her chest. She smells of blood and old ash, of fur and milk not yet come, but promised by the heat that hums through the circle of stone. The helper wipes her hands on a strip of hide, binding the cord with sinew pulled from the same animal that fed them through the last storm. Nothing wasted. Not bone, not breath, not the warmth that will cradle this child through the snows yet to come. Somewhere near the hearth, the elder drifts back into sleep, her hum fading to a whisper that curls around the newborn's cry like smoke rising into the black ribs of the ceiling. The mother rests her cheek against the baby's head, breath slow now, eyes soft with the weight of life pressed into her arms. When dawn finally creeps over the ridge, it will find the cave holding more than stories carved into stone. It will find the hush of birth, the warmth of flesh against flesh, proof that the dark can be tamed. If only for a heartbeat, if only for one long night beneath ancient rock. At the first pale smear of dawn, before the snow softens under the sun's thin touch, the hunters return to the cave mouth with a stag's broad antlers gleaming dark under frozen blood. They move in a hush broken only by the scrape of rawhide boots on the crusted drifts, the soft grunt of shoulders shifting under the weight of meat slung from poles carved smooth by the river's edge. Their breath hangs around their heads like ghosts, curling through the tangle of antlers that catch in pine boughs as they pass. The stag's eyes are half-lidded now, glassy with the memory of the arrow's bite. A smear of red clings to the curve of one antler where the final blow landed, sign that will be scrubbed clean when the hide is stripped and the bones boiled down for broth. The oldest hunter carries the head balanced across his shoulder, each step pressing deeper into the snow, as if the earth itself wants to keep this kill close to its frozen ribs. At the cave's mouth, the hides flap once in the dawn wind. A child peeks between the fur's edges, eyes wide as the hunters appear like moving stones against the pale snow. The smell of blood and fresh kill pushes through the entrance, stirring those curled near the hearth to blink awake and stretch stiff limbs. A mother pulls her cloak tighter around her shoulders, pressing her lips to the crown of the baby born just hours before, their warmth a soft promise that the hunt's gift will feed more than hunger tonight. They lay the stag near the fire circle, snow steaming where it touches the heat radiating from the mammoth bone hearth. The antlers splay wide, points casting long shadows across the first-strewn floor. One hunter presses his thumb into the groove of dried blood, tracing the path where life slipped from bone. His other hand grips a blade chipped from flint, edge sharp enough to whisper through skin and tendon without a sound. A woman kneels near the carcass, her hair bound back with sinew, so no strands fall into the meat that will soon simmer over the coals. She hums low as her fingers move along the flank, pressing against the warmest place where the fat sits heavy under the hide. The blood seeps between her knuckles, steaming where it meets the hearth's breath. Behind her, a boy holds the stag's broad foot in his lap, turning it over to marvel at the split hoof, the soft pad hidden beneath the frost. The half-tame wolf shifts from its place near the painted wall, nose twitching at the fresh kill. It keeps its distance, ribs rising and falling as it watches the blade slip under the stag's hide. The smell of copper and musk tangles with pine resin, the hush broken only by the crack of joints pulled loose from their sockets, the pop of tendons snapping free. This is no roar of triumph, no howl into the trees, only the quiet ritual of survival. Pressed close to the coals that hold their warmth against the dark, an elder touches one of the antlers, pressing her palm to its rough curve where the blood has dried to a thin crust. She remembers another stag, another winter, the way the bones stacked high when meat was plenty, and the children slept heavy with full bellies. Her thumb rubs a small circle against the point, blessing the kill with a promise to waste nothing, not marrow, not hide, not the memory of the beast's eyes as it fell. Outside, the wind carries the echo of antlers clashing far away, a low thrum through the trees that reminds the tribe there are always more waiting in the hush beyond the fire's reach. The hunters work without hurry, knives slipping through flesh and fur, their breath slow and steady as they carve life from bone. When the meat hangs on racks near the entrance, dripping the last of its blood onto packed snow, the tribe gathers close to the hearth once more. The painted beasts on the wall catch the dawn's first light, antlers and tusks flickering like shadows pressed into stone. And in the hush between the crackle of bone and the wind's soft growl, the blood on antlers shines, proof that hunger can be held at bay if only for one more night. Deeper in the cave, beyond the hearth's warm sigh and the hush of hides strung near the entrance, a single skull rests on a shelf of stone worn smooth by countless hands. It is small, the size of a child's head, but its brow and jaw are traced with careful lines of red ochre. Spiral marks and crossing slashes that catch the faint flicker of torchlight like old scars laid bare. A hollow eye socket glints with a smear of soot, the remnant of smoke that clung when the last hearth crackled bright. A girl kneels before it now, knees pressed into the cold floor, breath misting against the stone shelf as she leans closer to see the marks better. Her fingers hover just above the crown where a jagged break shows where bone once split under the weight of something sharp and sudden. She does not flinch at the thought. The shape of loss is woven deep into the stone ribs of this place, older than the skins that drape her shoulders. Beside the skull, a scrap of fur lies folded, soft with the smell of pine resin and old ash. It carries the scent of a winter long gone, the warmth of a child's hair pressed into its nap. The girl lifts the fur to her nose, inhales slow, and lets the hush of that memory slip into the hush of this moment. She knows the stories carved into the skull's face are not for the waking world alone. They belong to the drift of sleep. It's the flicker of dreams that hum in the coals when the wind claws at the cave's mouth. Behind her, an elder crouches low, her own hands pressed flat to the stone. She hums a tune so faint it threads between the cracks, winding through ochre marks, as if the shapes themselves breathe. Her voice does not rise above the steady drip of meltwater that leaks from a crack overhead, falling one drop at a time onto the stone shelf. Each drop lands with a hush that feels like a heartbeat caught in the bones. A boy stands near the passage's mouth, eyes wide and shoulders stiff beneath his fur cloak. He grips a small bone figure in his palm, an antlered beast carved smooth by a hunter's idle knife. He does not step closer, but his eyes follow the path of the girl's fingers as they trace the red lines around the skull's brow ridge. He wonders what dreams might wake if he were to press his own mark there. What hush might rise from the stone to wrap around his ribs when sleep comes calling. The painted skull does not speak, but it holds every word ever whispered into the dark. It knows the scent of fresh blood and the taste of tallow smoke drifting up from the hearth. It knows the feel of raw hide stretched tight over an open wound, the quiet scrape of a blade drawn across soft skin. It remembers the warmth of the tribe pressed shoulder to shoulder, breath woven into fur, each heartbeat a promise that the cave's hush will never be empty. When the torch guttering in the girl's hand flares once, shadows ripple across the skull's face. The marks seem to shift, spirals uncoiling, slashes bending into shapes, half remembered from the dreams that drift through the elder's hum. The girl presses her thumb to one swirl, leaving behind a smudge of fresh ochre that gleams wet in the flicker, before it fades back to the color of dried blood. Outside, the storm curls its claws through the pine branches, rattling the hides stretched at the entrance. But here, where stone cradles bone, the hush holds steady. The painted skull keeps its watch, eyes empty, yet full of all the stories that hum through the marrow of the tribe. And when the girl finally rises, the elder's hum follows her steps back toward the warmth of the hearth. A promise that some spirits never drift too far from the coals that first shaped their shadows on the cave wall. Near the back wall of the cave, where the stones curve inward like a cupped hand, a thin bone flute rests on a folded strip of hide. Its surface is smooth as river stone, pale and marked with tiny notches carved by a blade sharp enough to slip through marrow. A child's breath still lingers in its hollow heart, a hush of music that waits for darkness to deepen before it wakes again. An elder lifts the flute now, fingers trembling only slightly as they find each hole by memory alone.
Oh.
Her thumb traces the faint groove where her father's blade once scraped the bone clean, where her mother's hum shaped the first tune that drifted through its hollow length like smoke curling from a dying fire. She presses the flute to her lips, the edge cold against her cracked skin, and lets out a single slow note that coils into the hush like a whispered promise. The sound slips across the stones, a high, thin thread that weaves through the sleeping tribe gathered near the hearth. Children stir in their furs, lashes flickering as the flute's sigh folds into their dreams. A hunter's hand twitches near the coals, the shape of old hunts stitched into the hollow between the notes. Even the half-tame wolf lifts its head, ears flicking at the sound as if it remembers a time when it, too, prowled the dark alone before fire and bone wove its ribs into this quiet circle. The elder's eyes drift half-closed as she breathes into the flute again. The note wavers, then settles, steady as the drip of meltwater from the ridge above. It fills the painted walls with life for a heartbeat. Bison shifting their shoulders, antlers lowering, tusks swinging in slow arcs that brush the hush with old stories pressed deep into stone. She knows the beasts carve their listen, each one hungry for the warmth of a breath that reminds them they were once flesh and bone and blood beneath the open sky. A boy kneels close, toes curled against the cold floor, his fingers wrapped around a scrap of fur that carries the scent of the elder's hands. He watches the flute move between her lips, eyes wide. Seeing the way each note lifts her shoulders like a pair of wings too soft to fly, but strong enough to carry her voice to the darkest corners of the cave. He imagines the wind on the ridge catching the sound, carrying it down the slope where the trees bend low under snow's weight. Outside, the storm shifts, a soft growl of wind that presses its breath against the hides, stretched at the entrance. The note from the flute quivers in answer, bending, but never breaking, sliding through the cave like a trickle of thaw that will not freeze again. The elder's fingers dance along the bone, pressing the notches in a rhythm that feels more like a heartbeat than a song. When her breath grows thin, the tune fades to a hush that drifts between the ribs of the sleeping tribe. She lowers the flute onto the folded hide once more, thumb brushing the tiny holes, as if to thank them for holding her voice a while longer. The boy leans forward, pressing his ear to the bone's curve, listening for the echo still caught in its hollow belly. In the flicker of the hearth's dying coals, the painted beasts settle back into their silent shapes, shadows melting into the stone that holds them safe. The elder hums the last note under her breath, her voice rough but warm as a fur cloak pulled tight against the night. When the boy drifts back to his place near the fire, the flute stays behind, its hollow heart full of sleep. The promise of another song waiting to slip free, when the wind claws too close, and the tribe needs a tune to stitch their breath together once more. At the cave mouth, dawn presses its pale hand against the last drift of night, smearing shadows into the slow promise of morning. The hides stretched across the entrance sway once as the wind slips through, carrying the sharp scent of thaw where the ridge has begun to drip. Beyond the stone threshold, snow glitters under the first touch of sun. Thin crust cracking in places where footprints and pawprints froze deep through the longest night. Inside the hearth hums low, its last coals buried under a fresh armful of pine branches that snap and hiss as they catch. Smoke threads upward, brushing the soot-black ceiling before curling back down to kiss the fur cloaks draped over sleeping shoulders. A child blinks awake near the fire, eyes wide and soft, lashes heavy with dreams, not yet untangled from the hush that draped them through the dark. He lifts his head just enough to watch the light slip over the elder's face, finding each wrinkle like a river winding through old stone. A woman stirs near the entrance, boots pressed into a patch of churned mud where snow melted under the warmth that seeped through the hides overnight. She pulls the fur aside with one hand, letting the cold bite her cheeks as she squints at the ridge. Tiny icicles shiver on pine boughs that droop low under their weight, dropping meltwater in a soft patter that echoes off stone and earth. She tastes the wind on her tongue, damp and sharp, laced with the faint trace of animals moving along paths the tribe knows by heart. Beside her a hunter kneels, one knee pressed into snow that seeps cold through the hide wrapped around his thigh. He studies the tracks that lead away from the cave, the deep drag of the stag hauled back under moonlight, the lighter pocks of the wolf's pads weaving through the drift. A line of smaller prints, a child's, sits half-buried near the stone threshold, a mark of little feet that wandered just far enough before turning back to the hush of the hearth. He drags his thumb along one print, pressing the shape deeper before the sun's warmth can erase it for good. The half-tame wolf slips past the woman's hip, nose to the wind, fur bristling as it tastes the world outside the stone's hold, its breath plumes white as it steps onto the crust, ears flicking at the faint creak of trees settling under the weight of snow that has not yet slipped free. For a heartbeat, the wolf's ribs swell with the memory of the forest's cold ribs, the chase through drifts, the snap of bone under fang. But the warmth behind its shoulders calls it back, soft as a child's hum pressed into its fur. Inside, the elder lifts a hand from her lap, fingers brushing the painted spiral etched deep into the wall by the hearth. Her lips shape a word too soft for the waking to hear, a blessing or a memory. The difference is only a thin line when stone holds so many stories. The coals flare once as a fresh stick catches, sending a line of smoke drifting toward the open mouth of dawn. The child near the fire stretches, toes peeking from the tangle of fur, eyes squinting at the pale light that slips across the stone floor. He imagines the path beyond the ridge, the sound of ice cracking open to spill fresh water through the old gorge. The quiet hush of antlers moving where the pines stand thick and patient. He presses closer to his mother's side, breath warm against her skin, the soft weight of sleep still pressing at the corners of his mind. When the hides fall back into place, the cave mouth holds the dawn like a secret, cupped in rough stone hands. The world beyond breathes its promise of thaw and hunger and hunt. But for now, the hearth holds steady, the coals alive beneath the mammoth bones. And in the hush between the first bird call and the last drift of sleep, the tribe wakes slow. Wrapped in the soft hush that only stone and fire and new light can weave. Beyond the ridge where the snow clings to stone like a second skin, a narrow path cuts through the hush of pine and wind. It has no marker but the shallow prints pressed by boots wrapped in fur. Each step a soft promise that the world stretches wider than the circle of the hearth's glow. The sun hangs low, pale and thin, but its light catches on the frost that beads along bent branches. Each drop a tiny flame against the vast hush. A boy stands at the path's start, shoulders hunched under a hide that drags at his elbows. His breath curls in slow threads that drift up to catch in the needles overhead, a ghost of warmth rising into the cold. He presses a palm to a tree's rough bark, fingers finding old scars left by blades scraping pitch to seal cracks in the cave's walls. Even here, far from the stone that held last night's dreams, memory breathes through wood and ice alike. Beside him, a hunter lifts his eyes to the ridge's crest, sees where the path dips behind a drift, marked by broken twigs and a single antler shed in the thaw's first promise. He knows what waits beyond the slope that slides down to. A stand of ancient spruce, where the deer bed down before dawn. The shallow bend of the river still choked by ice, but softening at its edges. He hums low in his throat, a note shaped more for the beast trailing behind them than for the boy whose eyes keep. Drifting back to the cave's hidden mouth, the half-tame wolf pads between their footprints. Nose to the crust where scents tangle. Pine sap, frozen blood, the thin copper bite of something gone just hours before they came. It lifts its muzzle, tasting the wind that carries the hush of far-off movement. Its tail flicks once, tapping the boy's calf, reminder that the pack reaches farther than stone walls when hunger calls them into the trees. At the ridge's crown, sun opens a single eye through a gap in the clouds, throwing pale gold across the path that snakes down the other side. The hunter pauses, spear slung across his shoulders, shadows stretching long and thin down the drift. He remembers other footprints pressed here, men and women who carried mammoth bones strapped to their backs, children who scattered flint shards like seeds behind them, a line of lives stitched to this winding hush that leads away but always. Circles home, the boy drags a stick through the snow, tracing spirals that remind him of the painted skull tucked deep inside the cave's ribs. Each swirl presses a promise into the drift that he, too, will leave his mark beyond the stone when the path calls him forward. He watches the lines vanish as the wind kicks up, a quiet reminder that not all marks stay pressed in the world's skin forever. Some drift off like sparks from the hearth, gone before they settle. The hunter steps onto the slope, boots sinking to his ankles, the sound no louder than a sigh. The boy follows, one hand buried in the wolf's rough fur as they move together down the path. Snow slips from overhanging branches, tapping their shoulders with cold that sinks through fur and skin but never quite reaches the hush that lives between their ribs. Below the ridge, hush of wind threading through the pines like a hum caught between sleep and waking. The path winds on, a thin seam in the fabric of white, always pulling forward toward something the boy cannot yet name but feels humming in the bone deep in his wrist, and high above, where the stone throat of the cave watches through drifting. Snow, the footprints left behind, hold their warmth for a little while longer. The hearth's smoke rises thin into the sky, a faint promise that the path, no matter how far it drifts, always finds its way back to the hush of fur, stone, and slow-breathing dreams. Back inside the cave, the last hush of dusk settles over. The circle of stones where the hearth's final coals breathe in tiny sighs of warmth. The tribe gathers close once more, boots pulled free of snow, fur cloaks heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth. A thin line of smoke drifts up through the black ribs of the ceiling, carrying the memory of the day's fire into the hush that waits beyond the stone walls, near the hearth's edge. An elder crouches low, her hands cupped around a small coal wrapped in moss. She lifts it as if it were the last heartbeat pressed between fur and stone. A promise kept alive through the drift of footprints and the hush of teeth waiting at the forest's edge. Her thumb brushes a flake of ash from its surface, leaving a smudge of warmth that catches the flicker of the dying glow. A child watches, wide-eyed, a strip of tallow cloth clutched in his small hand. He knows this coal not by name, but by the way his mother's hum drifts around it like a soft coat. By the way each ember stitched together the stories told when snow swallowed every other light. He leans closer, breath brushing the moss, his tiny ribs lifting and falling as if to match the slow pulse of heat that lives beneath the ash. The half-tame wolf shifts behind them, its paws pressed into the ring of fur that lines the hearth. It lifts its nose to sniff the faint curl of smoke eyes flicking from the elder's hands to the boy's quiet awe. A single huff drifts from its throat, as if to say that it, too, remembers the way the world grows sharp when the fire is gone, how teeth glow brighter when no ember waits behind stone. Outside the cave mouth, the wind curls around the hides like a patient animal waiting for its chance. Snow creeps along the ridge, soft as breath, pressing against the stones but never quite slipping through. The path beyond drifts over, footprints fading under the slow weight of night. Yet in this small circle, the coal hums, warm enough to promise that the dark will never swallow them whole. A hunter crouches near the elder, a strip of dry bark in his hand. He presses the coal against it, watching as the moss smolders, smoke blooming into the hush like a story waking from sleep. He cups his hand around the faint flicker, feeding it slivers of dried pine, each one catching the heat like teeth catching flesh. Slowly, the spark grows, a glow soft at first, then strong enough to paint shadows across the painted beasts pressed into the walls. The boy reaches out his hand, close enough to feel the warmth kiss his skin. He knows this new fire will travel when the tribe does, wrapped in moss, tucked in the crook of an elder's arm. A single breath of promise, carried across drifts and frozen rivers until another hearth waits. It is a heartbeat pressed into the ribs of every story told in the hush between sleep and waking. The elder hums once more, the tune rising with the smoke that threads through the black ceiling. Her eyes soften when the flame catches for good, twisting up to curl around the bones stacked near the hearth. The child's shoulders relax, his breath falling into the slow rhythm of the coal's crackle. The half-tame wolf sighs, pressing its ribs tighter to the warmth that will hold them all through the night. Outside, the dark waits, the snow drifts gather. But here, in the hush of stone and fir and slow-breathing hope, a new fire lives, always waiting, always ready to spark. The next dream, the next hunt, the next soft promise that no winter wind will ever swallow this warmth whole. Beyond the warmth of the cave, where the last hush of dawn drifts into pale morning, a line of stones marks a place few steps dare linger. Here at the edge of the clearing where the pines stand thick and old, a cluster of boulders rises like the bones of giants half buried in frozen earth. Beneath them, a small hollow waits spirits beneath the stones. The tribe calls it a breath of memory pressed deep into soil that never truly sleeps. A woman kneels near the largest rock, her knees damp from snowmelt that seeps through her hide leggings. Her fingers trace the rough grooves worn into the boulder's skin by wind and rain. Each mark a soft reminder of hands that once pressed here to ask for warmth, for meat, for the safe return of a hunter when the moon sat dark. She hums under her breath, sound that slips between the crevices, like smoke curling through pine boughs overhead. Near her feet, scatter of old bones rests half buried in the drift, slivers of ribs, tiny shards of antler, the broken tip of a spear shaft carved long before the child at her side first opened his eyes to the cave's glow. The boy crouches low, breath fogging the stones as he lifts a thin chip of flint, its edge dulled by time. He turns it over in his palm, feeling the weight of what was left behind when voices sank into the dirt, carried down to the hush beneath. The half-tame wolf stands back in the shadows of the trees, ears flicking at the soft rustle of the woman's hum. Its breath rises in slow clouds that drift into the spaces between the stones. Somewhere deeper in the earth, the ancestors' bones hold that warmth, a quiet promise that when the world turns sharp with hunger, the spirits wait beneath the surface, listening to every word whispered into the dark. She presses her palm flat to the stone, cold biting at the skin but the hum steady in her throat. It is not a plea nor a bargain struck with the roots that twist through old marrow. It is a memory spoken into the hush that they are still here, breath warm against the wind. Children's feet pressing new prints into snow that drifts over. Footprints left by souls long buried. The boy lays his flint shard atop a flat rock where meltwater pools in a shallow dip. He sees his own reflection waver there, eyes wide, hair tangled with the scent of the hearth's last smoke. He does not look away when the woman's hum grows quieter, slipping down between the stones where no fire's glow can follow. Knows the hush will hold it. Cradle it in darkness. Feed it back to the coals when the wind claws too close. A breeze rustles through the clearing, carrying the pine's sharp breath down the path that winds back to the cave. The woman stands, knees stiff, hands smeared with the grit of damp earth. She touches the boy's shoulder, guiding him away from the hollow, leaving behind the hum still caught in the stone's rough ribs. When they reach the path's bend, the wolf pads after them, paws, silent in the drift. Its tail flicks once as it glances back, the hush beneath the stones, waiting. The promise of old spirits pressed deep into the earth where snow can never truly hide them, and above it all, the ridge holds the soft glow of a sun not yet strong, enough to melt the past, but warm enough to wake the bones that hum below, a memory ready to stir when the fire flickers and the tribe gathers close to listen. At the first thaw of the day, when the sun climbs just enough to crack the frost, from the shallow stream, the tribe moves slow among the bare tray. A pile of pale strands grows between them, roots thin as sinew, knotted with grit that will not wash clean until they reach the stream's bend. The air smells of cold water and old bark, the promise of a meal that will twist the tongue and chase hunger from their bellies, even if only for a breath or two. These roots bite when chewed raw, yet their bitterness hums through bone, strong enough to keep the tribe upright when the snow still clings to the cave's mouth. The half-tame wolf watches from the shadows of the tree line, paws pressed into the soft patch where the snow gave up its hold. Its ears flick at the scrape of bone against stone, the rustle of cold fingers parting damp moss. It knows this taste, the bitterness that lingers in the back of the throat. A tang that reminds even the sharpest teeth they must bend to. What? The earth gives. It yawns, breath rolling in soft clouds that drift toward the pair crouched low to the ground. When the bundle is big enough to press both palms around, the woman rises, wiping her fingers against the hide wrapped at her waist. Dirt smears across her wrist, lines of old earth pressed into the cracks of her skin. She hums to the boy, a tune as quiet as the wind threading through the pines above. He echoes the sound, small and breathy, as he tucks a final scrap of root into the bundle tied at her hip. They move down the bank to the shallows, where the stream hisses over stones slick with melt. She kneels again, dipping the bitter strands into the water, rubbing them clean until the river carries the last grit away. Her reflection shivers in the swirl, lines of bone and skin drifting apart in the ripples before settling again. The boy cups his hands, scooping water to rinse the roots once more, careful not to lose even a single strand to the hush of the current when they stand. The bundle drips against her hip, a cold promise wrapped in damp hide. She glances back at the ridge where the path waits, footprints pressed into soft ground that will freeze again come nightfall. The boy's small hand brushes hers, fingers sticky with mud and the sharp scent of root that will linger under his. Nails long after the hearth softens the bite with smoke. Behind them, the half-tame wolf slips through the brush, paws leaving no trace but a faint scent of musk and wildness that hums at the edge of the tribe's circle. The wind sighs through the trees, bending thin branches until they crack and creak above the footprints winding home. By the time they return to the cave, the bitter roots will hang near the hearth's breath, drying slow in the curl of smoke that hums around bone and fur. And when the cold presses too close, a strip will be chewed into softness. Its bite a reminder that sometimes what keeps the tribe standing is taste sharp enough to wake the old spirits humming beneath the stones. At the far edge of the clearing, where the ridge crumbles into a scatter of limestone ledges, a child stands with bare toes curled over stone, slick with melting frost. The cave mouth is a small hush behind him now, its warmth just a memory pressed between shoulder blades that shiver each time the wind pushes across the back of his neck. He lifts his eyes to the pale slice of sky, framed by pines that lean into. The crag's branches clawed by old storms, roots clutching rock like knotted fists. He knows he is higher than he should be. The climb began with small footholds hidden in shadow, places where older feet pressed smooth the limestone, where moss weeps a thin drip of meltwater that hums through the cracks like a heartbeat slowed to stone. Ow. One hand grips a shallow ridge. Above his head, fingertips numb where ice bites the skin. Below, The drift softens with each breath of sun that sneaks through the pines. But here on the ledge, the air tastes sharp, cold enough to catch in his teeth. A voice calls from the clearing. Low, rough with the worry that clings like old fur. The child turns his head, chin brushing the stone, eyes searching for the figure moving near the cave's entrance. A hunter stands there, one hand shading his eyes, the other resting on a spear planted in soft snow. The wolf circles his boots, nose lifted to the scent of fresh roots drying near the hearth. It knows the child's scent. To the sharp tang of fear braided with the hush of breath held too long against the wind, he presses higher. Palms scraping at the rock's grit. Tiny flakes crumble away, drifting past his cheek to vanish into the dark green hush where the pines reach for whatever warmth the sky can spare. Each foothold feels smaller now, edges brittle under the soft press of skin that remembers the cave floor's heat. His chest hums with the beat of blood too quick for this still air. A tune that threads between his ribs and drifts up the ridge like smoke curling from the hearth at dusk below. The hunter lifts his chin, voice threading between trees that stand like old bones cracked by the thaw. He hums a note the child knows, a promise tucked in the shape of sound, the same low hush sung at the hearth's edge when sleep feels far away. The child closes his eyes, forehead pressed to stone that holds the last breath of night's chill. He hums back, thin and quiet, a slip of warmth that drifts down to the half-tame wolf, now staring up with yellow eyes bright against the snow. The wind shifts, pulling at the fur tied around the child's shoulders, lifting it like a wing that will never truly fly. He opens his eyes to see the sky again, pale blue, clouds like fat animals drifting slow across the sun's first reach. His fingers uncurled from the stone, palm flat against the cold, feeling the hum of the ridge press deep into his bones. The voices below blend with the hush of pine needles brushing against rock. The old song of stone that remembers every foot that ever clung to high. One small stone slips loose, tapping the ledge once before bouncing down the slope, thudding. Into snow where the wolf's ears flick, but its paws hold steady. The hunter's voice steadies, softer now, weaving warmth into the hush that swallows fear. The child's feet shift, pressing back toward the ridge's curve, seeking the prints he left behind on his way up. Each step down hums through the ledge, the promise of earth waiting to catch him if he listens close enough to remember where to place his trust. When his feet touch the drift again, the wolf noses his hand, breath warm against fingers, still cold. With stone's old bite, the hunter lays his palm on the child's shoulder, thumb brushing away grit caught in the soft curls at the back of his neck. Together they stand, eyes drifting back to the ledge that waits like an old spirit, patient, quiet, always there for those who climb too high and need the hush of the ridge to remind them where they belong, beyond the ridge where the pines bow low under the weight of the thaw's slow promise. The ground hums with a hush that feels alive beneath the boots of those who stand still enough to listen. A boy and a hunter crouch in the shadows of the spruce, backs pressed to a broad, trunk eyes drifting across the wide clearing where a herd moves like a single breath caught between earth and sky. The thunder beast Mammoth drifts at the center of it all, its tusks carving slow arcs through the pale morning light. Each step the beast takes sinks deep into the softening crust, cracking old drifts into fissures that steam where the sun lingers longest. A rumble presses up from the soil into the boy's bones, a thrum that travels through his ribs and pools in his throat until his breath matches the hush of the giant's tread. His fingers curl into the moss at his side, cold water seeping into his skin. The scent of old pine and wet fur mixing with the sharp bite of fear, sweetened by wonder. The hunter leans forward just enough to study the way. The herd shifts calves, pressed close to the legs of mothers whose hides are thick with dried mud and frost. Long trunks swing low, testing the crust for cracks that might snap a leg or swallow a foothole. When the wind drifts from the clearing, it carries the heavy musk of sweat and crushed grass, a scent older than the painted beasts pressed into the cave walls. A lone bull stands apart, ribs broad as the hollow beneath a fallen boulder, tusks chipped and scarred from fights fought when the rivers ran thick with melt. Frost clings to the coarse fur along its spine, dripping in tiny rivulets each time it shakes its massive head. The boy watches a black bird dance around the beast's shoulders. wings flicking at the clumps of mud and insects trapped in its shaggy coat. Each flap sends a whisper of feathers across the hush of the clearing, a reminder that even giants carry the small ones with them wherever they roam. The half-tame wolf waits behind the pair, belly pressed low to the ground, eyes locked on the herd's restless shapes. Does not snarl or growl, it knows. These giants are not for the teeth of a single hunter, or even a whole pack hungry from too many lean nights. Its breath curls between its paws, flicking at the faint crack of ice splitting under a mammoth's weight. The boy shifts closer to the hunter, nose brushing the hide that drapes the man's shoulder. He hums a question without speaking, a soft note that means, how do we touch this thunder without it swallowing us whole? The hunter answers only with the press of his thumb to the boy's wrist, a hush that says some beasts are meant to be chased only in dreams or painted into stone, where their tusks will never swing wide enough to crack your ribs. A calf stumbles near the edge of the herd, its trunk curling toward the boy's scent where it drifts through the trees. For a moment, the eyes of the giant and the small human meet black, wide, ancient as the hush that hums between each heartbeat. Then, the calf's mother shifts her bulk, pushing it back toward the safety of the herd's slow pulse. Snow slides from a pine bough overhead, landing with a muffled hush that startles a crow into flight. The thunder beast lifts its head, ears flaring wide as the clearing goes still. Breath held tight, the boy leans into the hunter's shoulder, bones pressed to bone, waiting for the world to remember how to move again. When the herd drifts on, shoulders swaying, trunk sweeping across the thaw's first soft grasses, the rumble in the ground fades, until only the boy's pulse hums with its echo. He stands at last, the hunter's hand resting heavy on his back, guiding him away from the place where giants walk so close.
Oh, yeah.
You can feel the thunder in your teeth, and when they return to the hush of the cave, the painted walls will hold a new shape, tusks arcing wide, shoulders broad as dusk, a promise that some beasts are too sacred to claim, yet always close enough to feel when the earth hums beneath your bare feet. Far from the hush of the hearth, where the wind drags its cold breath across the open ridge, a single set of footprints drifts into the white, a line pressed shallow into snow that grows deeper with every hour the sun hides behind the gray ribs of the sky. A boy, older than the one who shapes clay near the fire, younger than the hunter who hums by the stone wall, moves slow through drifts that tug at his boots and swallow the warmth pressed close to his skin. He carries no spear, it's only a bundle, tied tight against his back, scraps of root and sinew, wrapped in a scrap of fur that smells of the hearth's last smoke. His breath curls around his face, a ghost that drifts away each time he stumbles, palms pressed raw to the crust to keep. From sinking under, he hums, though the tune is thin now, caught in the tight drum of ribs that ache where cold has slipped past hide and skin. Behind him, the wind hushes over the path, pulling snow down from the ridge to swallow each print before the next finds its mark. The trees stand silent, pines heavy with ice that snaps loose when the gusts push hard enough to bend their trunks. He lifts his eyes once to watch a crow settle high on a bare limb, feathers puffed thick against the chill. Black eyes watching the boy drift like a loose coal blown too far from the fire. He remembers the warmth pressed against his side, that morning the mother's hum, the hunter's rough hand on his hair, the way the half-tame wolf curled its ribs around his feet when sleep still clung to his lashes. He thought the ridge would open its arms when he stepped through the line of stones that mark the tribe's hush. He thought the path would hold him the way the cave walls do when the wind claws at the hides, stretched across its mouth. But the snow creeps deep when you walk alone, hums in your bones, pulls the blood back from fingers that fumble at knots, meant to hold warmth close. His eyes slip shut as he kneels in the drift, breath caught in the sharp bite of air that rattles inside his throat. The crow above shifts on its branch, a single feather drifting down to land near the boy's cracked boots, black against the white that gathers in the lines of his knuckles. Far behind, the tribe stirs in the hush of stone, one voice whispering his name into the coals when the mother's eyes flick open to find only a hollow where he once lay. A hunter's boots press fast through the fresh drifts. The half-tame wolf's nose low to the ground, tail a dark blur against the low sky. They follow the faint curl of breath left behind, the print of a knee sunk too deep to hold much promise. In the hush that falls when wind gives up its growl, the boy hums once more, voice rough as dry bark caught on the snow's edge. He presses his palm to the feather at his feet, eyes drifting closed as the world softens around him, pines bending low, the ridge folding its cold arms tighter than any fur draped around his shoulders. When the hunter finds him, boots breaking, the crust with each careful step, the boy's hum has slipped down into the drift. A hush, waiting to be carried back to the hearth, where the elder's voice will shape it into a story told in the hush of sleep. The half-tame wolf noses his hair, breath warm where the snow has not yet bitten all the way through. They lift him slow. Arms wrapped under frozen limbs, the wind sighing through the pines as if it too remembers the warmth that waits beyond the ridge. And when the first footprint falls on the path home, the snow drifts again, soft and patient, covering the hush of loss with the promise that no one truly disappears where stone and fire hold them close in the glow of the hearth. Of stone folds close around those who drift half asleep. Her mother sits with her knees drawn to her chest. A bone comb pressed gentle through the knots that cling to her daughter's tangled hair. The comb is small, carved from the rib of an old deer, polished smooth by years of fingers tracing its curve before the dawn pulls them from dreams. Each tooth is narrow and sharp, strong enough to pull burrs from the fur but soft in her careful hand. The child leans into her mother's lap, eyes half closed, lashes fluttering each time the comb catches on a twist of hair. She does not cry. The teeth tug, but the warmth of her mother's hum drifts through her scalp. A hush that soothes where the world has knotted itself too tight. Now and then, the mother pauses to press her thumb against the girl's crown, feeling the soft pulse of a heartbeat that hums below skin and bone. Near the fire, the elder hums an answer, voice weaving through the smoke that curls up to kiss the blackened ribs of the ceiling. She remembers the first teeth carved into that bone, the hunter who scraped it flat with a flint blade, the woman who sanded each notch until it slipped through hair without tearing at the roots. She remembers the child who sat restless on her own lap, hair as wild as the wolf that now sleeps with its tail curled close to the coals. The comb moves slow, teeth clicking through knots that smell of pine needles and the faint musk of fur. Each strand untangles in the hush of crackling wood, tiny sparks drifting up like fireflies that vanish before they find the painted beasts pressed deep into the walls. The mother's voice carries the old hum, a tune she shaped in her ribs when the child's first. Breath slipped warm into the hush of the cave. Beside them, the half-tame wolf lifts its nose, ears flicking at the soft scrape of bone through hair. It settles again, muzzle pressed to its paws, the rumble of its breath, a quiet drum that keeps time with the mother's hum. Outside, snow drifts against the hides stretched across the entrance. The wind's growl softened by the weight of new flakes piling along the ridge. When the last knot slips free, the child sighs, body gone soft against her mother's thigh. The comb rests in the mother's palm, its teeth shining pale in the hearth's breath. She runs her fingers through the clean strands, each one smooth now, ready to hold the warmth of the fire when the cold tries to creep too close. She presses the comb to her lips, kissing the rib bone that holds the memory of so many nights spent pulling the wildness from hair, spun soft in sleep. The child drifts deeper, breath slow, mouth parted just enough for the hum to slip through. A tune shaped now by a heartbeat that will carry it forward long after the bone cracks and splinters. Long after the teeth break one by one in some far hush. The mother will never see, when the comb is wrapped again in soft hide and tucked. Beside the hearth, the mother curls herself around the child, her own hair spilling across the girl's shoulders like a second fur cloak. The elder's hum fades into the stone. The wolf's tail sweeps once across the floor, and the coals settle with a sigh that drifts into the hush where bone, hair, and warmth tangle together, knots that no winter wind can pull apart. Beyond, the sheltering ridge, where the land dips into a narrow gorge carved by a river, now choked with ice and old bones. The wind gathers its breath like a hunter pulling sinew tight on a bow. A storm hums there, pressed deep between the walls of stone, where echoes twist back on themselves until even the trees bend their heads to listen. Snow drifts sideways in sharp ribbons, swirling above the gorge before dropping fast into the dark. Where the tribe once pulled fish from the shallows when the sun sat high and warm, at the gorge's edge, a pair of hunters stand knee-deep in the drift, fur cloaks pressed flat against their ribs by the wind's hungry hands. One lifts his chin, squinting down into the swirl where white mist coils like breath caught in the throat of the earth. He sees shadows shift where the water should. Run. Hears the low rumble of stones rolling under the weight of melt and snow pressing deeper into the gorge's ribs. He does not speak. His breath is a ghost that vanishes before it can find the ear of the man who stands beside him. Spear held tight enough to make the wood creak in his palm. A scrap of hide flaps from a low branch near their boots a marker. Left by the elders seasons ago, a sign that when storms come the gorge will swallow more than footprints if you do not step carefully. The hunter's eyes catch it whipping in the wind, edges frayed and stiff with frost. He remembers how they fished there, when the ice cracked just enough to let the water sing. How the gorge walls threw every laugh and shout back up the slope until the sound felt too big for such thin ribs. Now, the gorge hums with a voice older than any word, growls, as snow slides from ledges high above, crashing into drifts that bury saplings and break the silence with a heavy sigh. The half-tame wolf crouches at the hunter's feet, ears pinned. Flat, eyes wide and yellow against the storm's restless swirl, does not bark, only shifts its paws, tail tucked tight. Its ribs pressed close to the hunter's calf as if to remind him the hearth still waits somewhere behind this wind. Distant crack splits the hush, a boulder loosed by melt and weight tumbling into the gorge's throat. The sound rolls up the stone walls. A drumbeat that rattles the hunter's chests until the hum inside their bones feels too thin to hold its own shape. The second hunter tilts his spear down, tapping the crusted snow near the gorge's lip, testing the ground that trembles just enough to remind him the earth never truly sleeps. Behind them, the path back to the cave lies half buried in drifting white. The hides at the entrance will flap and sigh when the hunters return, pushing the snow's hush aside to slip back into the breath of warmth waiting near the hearth's glow. But here, above the gorge that snarls and hums in the dark, they stand a while longer, watching the storm press deeper into stone, carving new scars that the tribe will see when the thaw comes, and they climb down to touch the wet walls where moss hides the old marks left by ancestors whose footprints have long since drifted away. When they turn at last, a wolf slips ahead, nose low, tail sweeping snow from the narrow path. One hunter glances back once, eyes drifting over the rim of the gorge where shadows twist and the wind hums like a voice too old to name. He presses his hand to the rock's cold skin, a silent promise that they will return when the storm has spent its growl, when the river wakes and the bones of fish gleam. Beneath the first soft thaw, when the storm's growl fades to a distant hum beyond the ridge. The tribe gathers once more around the hearth, bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder. In a ring that feels older than the painted walls holding their warmth close, the coals breathe soft orange light onto fur-wrapped backs. Shadows flickering up to kiss the stone ceiling, where soot curls in shapes that remember every fire lit before this one, at the circle's heart. An elder lifts her chin, eyes half closed. As she hums the first low note of the fire circle song, it is not a tune shaped for the hunt or the hush of birth. It is a river song, slow and soft, meant to wind around the tribe's ribs and slip beneath the skin until the hush inside matches the hush that hums through the bones stacked near the flames. Her voice drifts like smoke, curling between the children's lashes as they blink sleep-heavy eyes at the soft glow. Beside her, a woman taps a carved bone against her palm, a gentle rhythm that weaves between the elders' hum. Each tap marks the beat of breath, the promise that their stories will hold steady through the longest night, that their names will slip into the coals and rise again when the next fire sparks awake. The children echo the taps, small hands drumming. Against the fur lining their laps, the hush of their palms blending with the fire's quiet crackle. A hunter leans forward, elbows braced on his knees, eyes caught on the shapes dancing in the coals, antlers, spirals, the tusks of the thunder. Beast pressed deep in the hush of memory. His lips shape the old words, rough but warm. The syllables pressing out of his ribs like smoke curling through pine boughs heavy with thaw. He does not need the meaning to hold true in the way the world does outside the cave. Each word is a spark that drifts up to settle in the soot above their heads. A mark to remind the dark they are never alone. The half-tame wolf lifts its muzzle, ears flicking at the hum that settles deep into the stone floor. It does not howl, its wildness softened by the circle that folds it close. Its breath curls in small ghosts that drift over the boy's bare toes, where he presses his feet against the wolf's side, feeling the slow thrum of its chest matching. The beat of the bone tapped soft in the elder's palm. When the song lifts higher, the children's voices join in, thin at first, then stronger. A hush-turned chorus pressed into the stone ribs of the cave. The painted beasts on the walls catch the glow, shadows shifting across tusks and claw marks. Each shape alive for the length of a breath before settling back into stillness. The hum folds them all together. Bone, fur, fire. Skin no edge left sharp enough to slip between them tonight. Outside, the hide stretched at the entrance. The wind rattles once, testing the strength of the hush within. It finds only the steady rise and fall of the song, a warmth too deep to claw apart. Snow drifts against the stones, but the circle holds ribs pressed close. Voices braided tight around the last spark caught beneath the mammoth bones stacked near the coals. When the final note softens into the hush, the elder's eyes drift shut, head tipping toward the child curled at her side. The bone drops into her lap, its carved teeth warm from the rhythm pressed into her palm. One by one, voices fade into breath, breath slips into sleep, and the fire settles with a sigh that hums its promise into the hush. The fire circle's song, always waiting, always ready to wake when the dark grows too heavy to bear alone, when the coals burn low and the hush inside the cave feels thick enough to press against the ribs. A scatter of eyes drift open to the pale slice of sky visible through a crack, between the hides stretched at the entrance. Outside, the dark holds its breath, and the ridge stands still as bone waiting to wake. Then a streak, a flare. A single star unravels across the black, its tail long and bright enough to pull a gasp from the oldest throat still warm near the fire. They say the sky once held its lights tight, each star stitched to the dark with sinew strong as mammoth tendon. But sometimes when the earth hums soft under the snow and the cave walls grow restless with dreams, the stitches slip, sparks break free. They drift down through the hush like flakes of ash shaken from the hearth's breath. The children stir from sleep, pressing small palms to the cold stone at their backs. Eyes wide as the first streak burns away into nothing. Near the mouth of the cave, a hunter pushes the hide aside, breath curling out into the night that hums with the soft growl of wind far beyond the ridge. He watches another flare slip across the stars, its light catching the frost along the pines until the whole slope glitters for a heartbeat. He does not speak. The hush is too thick for words here, too sacred for a voice to break apart a soft promise that sometimes the sky remembers how to fall. A girl crawls close to the entrance, here a dark knot spilling over her shoulders. She peeks past the hunter's elbow, lashes shivering each time a new spark cracks through the black. One slips so low, she swears she hears it hiss as it vanishes into the drifts that wait below the ridge. She hums, just once, a note too thin to carry far but strong enough to feel like a coal pressed into the stone beneath her feet. The half-tame wolf lifts its head, nose twitching at the cold drift of air that carries the faint temps of pine smoke and ironstone fallen from far beyond. Their world. Its eyes catch the flare reflected in the hunter's breath, flicker gone before the wolf settles again into the furs. Tail curled tight, ears pricked to the hush that follows each star's unraveling. Behind them, the elder's voice drifts. Up from the warmth by the hearth, a whisper more felt than heard. She does not rise. She does not need to. The children know her words already, a tale of lights born when the first beast cracked the sky open with its tusks. A promise that each falling spark carries a story waiting to be caught by hands strong enough to shape it into stone, paint, or bone flute song. One child dares to step past the hides, feet pressing soft into the crust of snow. His breath hitches when another star flares wide above the ridge, its tail so long it seems to brush the tops of the tallest pines. He presses his palm to his chest, feeling the hum of it echo there, a heartbeat stitched to the hush of the falling ash. His eyes drift shut, the cold biting his cheeks, while the warmth of the hearth waits behind him. Steady as the bones stacked near the fire's last glow, when the final streak fades and the sky stitches itself whole again. They slip. Back inside, breath weaving with the hush they left behind. The hunter pulls the hides back into place, the drift of stars caught now in memory. Pressed deep into the painted walls where tusks and antlers wait for the next child to trace, their shapes by the coal's soft light. The tribe settles slow. The wolf sighs, the elder hums, the fire coils into its last ember, and outside the stones embrace. The night holds the silence of falling stars, a promise that even when the dark grows wide and teeth wait at the edge of the world, there will always be sparks drifting down like ash, ready to light the next dream, the next hum, the next slow hush, pressed into the ribs of those who gather close to listen. When the hush of dawn curls soft around the cave's stone ribs, the tribe stirs as if they are part of the fire itself, coals that never quite die even when the world outside turns its teeth to the ridge. The hides shift at the entrance, letting in a thin breath of cold that drifts across fur-wrapped shoulders and the tangled hair of those still drifting between dream and waking. Somewhere near the hearth, an ember cracks, sending up a single thread of smoke that weaves into the hush like a final promise that warmth will always find its way back. A boy sits cross-legged near the bones stacked high beside the coals, a strip of fresh hide spread across his knees. He hums as his fingers work, pulling sinew tight through the holes punched by an old bone needle passed down from hands now buried beneath the snow. His lips move in the same shape the elder once sang when the stars fell like ash. Each note a stitch that binds more than hide, it holds the breath of the fire, the hush of the stones, the heartbeat of every shape painted on the cave's walls. Hunter kneels at the mouth of the cave, shoulder pressed to the cold lintel where frost clings in pale veins. He studies the slope beyond, eyes tracing the faint line where the path drifts toward the stand of pines that will wake with the thaw. The wolf slips past his hip, tail brushing against his ribs as it pads into the dawn's soft hush. Nose low to the drift where the first footprints press new shapes into the snow dot inside. The mother lifts her child into her lap, combing her fingers through hair that still carries the warmth of sleep. She pulls the fur tight around their shoulders, pressing her lips to the crown that smells of fire, tallow, and the faint musk of the half-tame wolf that sleeps close enough to steal heat when the wind pushes too hard at the hides. She knows the path beyond the ridge calls even now, but for this breath, this hush, they are still wrapped in stone and smoke. The elder sits with her back to the wall, palm flat against the spiral etched into the limestone's rough skin. Her eyes drift half shut as she listens to the new voices waking in the hush. The boy's hum, the child's quiet sigh, the wolf's low growl that fades as it slips into the trees. She mouths a word no one hears, a promise older than the stones themselves, stitched into the shape of breath that never quite leaves the walls empty. When the fire flares again, fed by dry pine gathered at dawn's first light, the hush breathes. With it, a slow exhale that hums through every rib pressed close to its warmth. They know the path will take them out again through snow, storm, the gorge that roars when meltwater wakes. The thunder beasts that drift across the flats with tusks bright as the moon's sharp edge. But for now, the cave holds them steady. A heart of stone and fur and bone that beats without hurry in the hush. Outside, the ridge catches the first gold of sun brushing the pines. Each needle tipped in light that flickers like the last sparks hidden in the fire's throat. The footprints weave down the slope, new marks pressed beside the faint memory of those who walked here before the lost brother. The child who climbed too high. The hunter who watched the gorge crack open with a storm's growl. Inside, the tribe drifts together once more. The wolf returns, nose dusted with frost, ribs warm where it curls near the boy's feet. The elder hums, the mother's comb presses gentle through hair. The coals sigh under the weight of new wood laid across old bone, and the hush, that soft, patient hush, holds every spark, every mark, every breath waiting to slip forward into the next story, carried by the slow, dreaming dark.